A Pakistan International Airlines plane with more than 100 people on board has crashed into a residential area in the city of Karachi.
The moment of disaster.
The plane was flying from Lahore when it came down near Model Colony, it's a neighborhood of Karachi.
सामने कॉलोनी में पूरी घरों का एक घर का एरिया है, पूरा पीछे घरों में आग लग गई है।
On a tense May morning in 2020, Pakistan International Airlines Flight 8303 prepared to fly from Lahore to Karachi. It was Ramadan, and the fasting crew faced extra pressure during the global lockdown. Despite clear skies and a reliable Airbus A320, the mismatched experience in the cockpit created an unnoticeable sense of danger. Authorities have been trying to hide the truth for years. What really happened that day? Let us uncover the horrible truths the government has been concealing for decades. An ordinary day turned to catastrophe. The crew of the flight included 2 pilots with contrasting levels of experience and backgrounds. With over 24 years under his belt at Pakistan International Airlines and a total of more than 17,250 flight hours, the captain was recently assigned as a standard inspector, a role meant to uphold stringent flying standards. Despite this prestigious position, his career had begun controversially after initially being rejected due to a psychological evaluation that deemed him unsuitable for pilot duties. He fought this evaluation, challenging the decision until he was finally allowed to train as a pilot. His co-pilot, the first officer, had significantly less experience, with around 2,300 hours logged. His early career had been rocky, marred by negative feedback that delayed his progression from second to first officer. The disparity in their experience likely created a steep authority gradient in the cockpit, which could affect communication and decision-making during the flight. As the aircraft, a 16-year-old Airbus A320 equipped with 2 CFM56 high-bypass turbofan engines prepared for departure, nothing seemed amiss. The weather was favorable, with clear skies and only a mild forecast of thunderstorms later in the day at Lahore. The aircraft took off without incident, climbing to its cruising altitude. However, beneath this veneer of normalcy, critical issues were brewing. Unknown to the crew, a combination of human error and mechanical malfunctions was setting the stage for a catastrophic sequence of events. The psychological pressures, and the varying levels of experience between the 2 pilots would soon converge in a critical test of their professional capabilities. As the flight neared Karachi, the first signs of trouble appeared subtly at first. These initial indicators were easy to miss, but marked the beginning of a series of failures that would challenge every aspect of the crew's training and resilience. The landing gear failed to deploy correctly, leading to a gear-up landing scenario. Compounding this, both engines failed, a rare and alarming occurrence that tested the limits of emergency response protocols. The unfolding emergency on board, the flight, underscored the fragile interplay between human factors and mechanical reliability in aviation. The crew's fasting state, the captain's controversial entry into the aviation field, and the first officer's relative inexperience all played roles in how they managed the crisis. The situation called for decisive action under extreme pressure, highlighting the importance of readiness and comprehensive training in averting disasters. This flight serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities in air travel, where the reliance on technology and the critical human element must align to ensure safety. The narrative of the flight is not merely a tale of mechanical failure, but a broader reflection on the importance of stringent training. the mental state of the crew, and the robustness of safety protocols in the face of unforeseen challenges. On a typical flight, pilots are expected to meticulously prepare for landing well in advance. This process involves setting up navigation tools, configuring flight computers, and discussing every detail of the upcoming approach to the runway. Normally, these preparations should start about 100 nautical miles before beginning to descend. However, on this flight, the pilots were caught up in casual conversation instead of focusing on these crucial tasks, discussing topics unrelated to their immediate responsibilities. Preparing for an approach is critical. It's a time when pilots review everything from navigation settings to emergency procedures. This isn't just about following a routine, it's about ensuring safety by thoroughly planning how to handle any unexpected events during landing. These discussions help both pilots have a clear understanding of what to expect and how to react, making it easier to spot and correct any deviations from the plan. Despite the importance of these preparations, on this flight, they were completely overlooked. As the aircraft neared the point where it needed to start descending, there was no indication that any of the standard pre-landing checks and setups had been completed. One might wonder if the first officer, responsible for flying the plane, had managed to set up the approach in silence amidst their other conversations. The initial flight path and arrival procedures had already been programmed into the plane's flight management computer and confirmed by air traffic control, but without the usual pilot briefing, it's likely that some key details were missed. When it came time to begin the descent, protocol was again ignored. Normally, the pilot not currently flying the plane on this flight, it should have been the captain, asks for permission from air traffic control to start descending. But here, it was the first officer who made the request. This might seem like a small detail, but in flying, every role and action is precisely choreographed to ensure safety. Following this request, the air traffic controller gave instructions to descend to a certain altitude and take a direct route to a specific waypoint. Proper procedure requires that these new instructions be entered into the navigation system and verbally confirmed by both pilots to avoid any misunderstandings. Unfortunately, this critical step was skipped. Next, we see how a normal flight begins to go wrong due to overlooked mistakes. The Karachi descent disaster. Direct routes can be tricky because they often mean fewer miles to descend, which can require adjustments like using speed brakes or allowing the plane to speed up to manage the descent properly. Here, the direct route to the waypoint did indeed shorten the distance available for descent, but no adjustments were made. The plane simply began to descend as if it had all the time and space initially planned. This oversight should have been obvious to the pilots, as it indicated that the plane was not aligning its descent with the actual conditions of the flight path. This series of missteps highlights a larger issue within the aviation industry. Sometimes, the routine can become so familiar that critical safety measures are neglected. Over-reliance on automated systems can contribute to this, as pilots may feel less compelled to intervene or verify the computer's decisions. On this flight, the computer continued to calculate the descent based on the presence of a holding pattern in the flight route, which wasn't applicable to their actual flight path. Without the usual pilot briefing to review these details, the oversight went unnoticed. The lack of rigorous adherence to standard procedures observed in this instance reflects a concerning trend where the formalities of flight operation can be overshadowed by complacency. These procedures are not just bureaucratic formalities. They are developed over many years and are fundamental to ensuring flight safety. This story serves as a reminder of the importance of maintaining discipline in following these protocols, ensuring that familiarity does not breed complacency. The safety of everyone on board depends on it. Pilots often aim to connect with the instrument landing system early to save time and fuel, a practice usually expected by air traffic control. This anticipation encourages pilots to manually keep track of how much distance they have left, to the landing runway. By multiplying their altitude by 3, they get a rough idea of the distance required for a safe descent. If the actual distance available is less, pilots know they must adjust their approach, highlighting the importance of not just relying on the automated flight management computer. Such manual checks are part of the crucial skills pilots are paid to perform. As the aircraft approached Karachi, it reduced engine power and began descending more quickly to align with its calculated path. This phase saw the first signs of procedural neglect. Air traffic control issued a new altitude directive, which the crew acknowledged but did not implement in the flight control unit. Such seemingly small oversights can critically undermine flight safety. Discussions in the cockpit then drifted to unrelated topics, likely causing the crew to miss the unusual silence on their supposed frequency. This lapse in communication underscores the potential dangers of complacency in cockpit operations. The descent continued, with the aircraft still set to perform a now unnecessary holding pattern, adding an imaginary 23 nautical miles to their intended route. This error was signaled by an incorrect turn indication on the navigation display and repeated waypoints in the flight management computer, which went unnoticed by the crew, a serious oversight indicating poor situational awareness. After being handed over to the Karachi approach controller and instructed to descend further, the pilots still neglected to adjust the FCU or verify the correct settings. The first officer enabled the autopilot approach mode to align the aircraft with the landing beams, but without correcting their descent path, this action proved ineffective. Despite being significantly off their intended altitude and route, the situation was still manageable. A simple execution of the holding pattern calculated by the flight management computer could have corrected their course without major delays or additional costs. However, the decision to proceed without making necessary adjustments marked a critical misjudgment. As the aircraft passed key waypoints too high and too quickly, air traffic controllers grew increasingly concerned about their altitude, but the pilots downplayed their actual altitude during communications, indicating a loss of control over the situation. Despite clear indications of being out of alignment, the decision to continue the flawed approach demonstrated a breakdown in command and adherence to operational procedures. The sudden deployment of landing gear and activation of speed brakes in a rushed attempt to salvage the approach was indicative of a chaotic and disorganized descent. This pattern of errors reflected a concerning trend in the captain's flying history, revealed by an examination of his operational flight data. His record of unstable approaches and excessive descent rates suggested a habitual disregard for compliance that had not been effectively addressed by the airline. This history set the stage for the impending crisis, as the aircraft, now caught in a disorganized and hazardous descent, struggled to realign with the runway. The cockpit was characterized by confusion and misplaced confidence. The pilots, sticking to their incorrect path, overlooked multiple chances to correct their approach, showing a severe loss of situational awareness and operational control. This breakdown wasn't just a technical failure, but a deeply human error, a stark reminder of the delicate balance between routine operations and the potential for disaster in aviation. The captain of Pakistan A320 seemed overly pleased with the precarious situation of the aircraft, treating the dangerous moment as a testament to his piloting prowess. It appeared as though he thrived on the thrill, seeing it almost as a game of daring against the rules of aviation. In contrast, the air traffic controller, clearly unimpressed and concerned by this audacious maneuver, issued a stern command to the flight to turn left, heading 180. This command was intended to add extra miles to the flight path, offering the crew a chance to correct their dangerously high approach. An intervention meant more for safety than for convenience. The following chapter shows a crew ignoring instructions, leading to a dangerous landing approach, a flight's fatal course. Despite the clarity of the controller's command, the captain chose to ignore it. He confidently reported that they were comfortably positioned and established on the correct approach path for landing, a claim that seemed disconnected from reality. Moments before, the aircraft was still at a dangerously high altitude, far from where it needed to be to safely approach the runway. Due to its high altitude, the aircraft became caught between different signals from the glide slope antennas. These signals interfered with each other, misleading the aircraft's systems into thinking they were correctly aligned with the landing path, a dangerous and false assurance. The systems aboard are built to operate within normal conditions and cannot always compensate for significant errors or unusual maneuvers by the crew. This scenario was a clear example of how critical it is for flight crews to adhere to standard procedures and safety guidelines. Yet, the captain and his crew persisted in their mistaken belief, dismissing further instructions from the air traffic controller, who reiterated the command to turn left. Unmoved, the crew maintained their course, convinced they were on the right track for a safe landing. As the aircraft neared the runway, still several miles out and only 390 feet above the ground, it was traveling at a perilous speed of 242 knots, well above the configured speed of 225 knots. This discrepancy triggered several automated warnings. Flaps were set to position 1 in an attempt to increase drag and reduce speed. However, this attempt was in vain as the aircraft continued its steep descent, trying to align with a glide path that was well below a safe altitude. The aircraft was moving too fast to safely extend the flaps, leading to further complications. A series of alarms began to sound as the aircraft's pitch reached an extreme 13 degrees nose down, indicating a severe misalignment that exceeded the operating capabilities of the Airbus autopilot. This resulted in the automatic disconnection of the autopilot, another critical alert that the crew failed to address as they continued their manual control over the aircraft. For the first officer, this situation would have been exceedingly stressful. Normal approaches typically maintain an angle close to horizontal, but now they were facing a severe downward angle. Just seconds later, the aircraft's rapid descent rate triggered more alarms, including a sink rate warning followed by several pull-up commands. These commands are designed to be immediate and non-negotiable, instructing the pilots to perform a terrain escape maneuver to avoid a crash. Despite the urgency of these warnings, they went unheeded. The first officer, in a bid to rectify the situation, began to adjust the aircraft's nose upwards, reducing the rapid descent from 7,400 feet per minute to a still risky 2,000 feet per minute. In a chaotic and uncoordinated response, the landing gear and speed brakes were retracted, decisions made silently, likely by the first officer in a desperate attempt to abort the approach. Retracting the gear while in control of the aircraft is highly unusual and indicative of the confusion within the cockpit. Amidst this disarray, Karachi approach, perhaps unaware of the dire circumstances inside the aircraft, cleared the flight to land on runway 25 left. As the approach continued, with the aircraft's speed barely reducing and hovering around 235 knots, someone made the decision to extend the flaps to configuration 2 and then 3, despite the excessive speed. This decision added further to the risks, complicating an already dangerous approach. This series of misjudgments and disregard for standard procedures illustrates a clear disregard for safety, where the thrill of risk-taking overshadowed the imperative of safe flying. The events leading up to this moment were not just a series of technical failures, but a profound breakdown in following safety protocols, highlighting the critical importance of adherence to guidelines and the catastrophic consequences when they are ignored. A clear divide emerged between the pilots as the aircraft descended through 1,100 feet. The first officer, sensing the need for a corrective maneuver, initiated an orbit to stabilize their approach. However, his decision was swiftly countered by the captain, who had other plans. Confident after receiving the landing clearance, the captain felt the situation was still under control and proceeded on his chosen path. This decision was made without a mutual agreement, highlighting a stark breakdown in communication. The captain then took a further step to assert control by activating the priority button on his side stick, effectively taking command of the aircraft. This critical action was taken silently, without the necessary verbal cue to the first officer, breaking the fundamental protocols of cockpit teamwork. As the plane continued its descent, it became apparent that the usual checks and balances of a standard landing were being ignored. Important procedures regarding the landing gear and flaps were neglected, and essential updates were not communicated. The cockpit had transformed from a zone of coordinated efforts into a realm of rushed and uncoordinated decisions. With the aircraft pitched downward at a dangerous angle, the speed escalated to 220 knots, far exceeding the safe limits for a standard landing approach. Reaching the crucial 1,000-foot mark, where the aircraft should have been stable and ready for landing, the situation was anything but controlled. Miscommunication had led to a failure in executing standard operating procedures, leaving the aircraft improperly configured for landing. The captain, who had initially handled the landing gear, was now piloting the aircraft, while the first officer was left out of the loop on crucial configuration settings. As the aircraft approached the runway, the cockpit was flooded with alarms and warnings, creating a cacophony that failed to prompt any effective response from the pilots. When the plane descended below 750 feet, a critical warning indicated that the landing gear was not deployed. However, amidst the numerous alerts and the overwhelming situation, this warning went unnoticed. An aircraft's battle against doom. As the plane neared touchdown at perilous speeds with the landing gear still retracted, the captain made a last-ditch attempt to salvage the situation by selecting the reverse thrusters. This move, however, was destined to fail without the landing gear deployed, as the necessary triggers on the wheels were not activated. Ignoring standard landing procedures, the captain also pushed the control stick forward and applied maximum manual braking. Desperate yet ineffective efforts given the circumstances. Meanwhile, the first officer, possibly still hoping to rectify the descent, intermittently attempted to pull the aircraft up, aiming to abort the landing and ascend. However, these efforts were counteracted by the captain's opposing inputs.
A303 approach. Ji sir. Appears to be turning left.
Resulting in a continued slight nose-down orientation, further complicating their chaotic descent. When the aircraft finally made contact with the runway, it was not the tires that touched down, but the engine's nacelles, scraping against the concrete and sending sparks flying, a dramatic and dangerous display. Inside the cockpit, the scene was frenzied as the captain continued his ineffective attempts to control the aircraft's descent by pushing forward on the stick and braking heavily. This harrowing approach to landing illustrated the critical importance of teamwork, adherence to protocols, and clear communication within the cockpit. The sequence of events served as a stark reminder of the dire consequences that can arise from poor cockpit management, emphasizing the need for pilots to operate in unison and follow established safety procedures meticulously. The ordeal could have easily led to disaster, underscoring the potential perils of disregarding fundamental aviation practices. The aircraft, built to handle significant stress, found itself grappling with a unique challenge during its landing phase. Its swift speed on the descent prevented excessive force on the landing gear, averting potential damage. However, the situation below the engines was critical, with auxiliary and transfer gearboxes nestled just where the concrete was fiercely grinding against the right engine. The left engine, known as engine number 2, clung to the runway longest until a fire warning in the cockpit signaled impending doom. As the aircraft maintained its full reverse thrust, a critical failure occurred. The generator of the troubled right engine failed, prompting an urgent switch of the electrical system to the left engine. Such emergencies typically spell disaster, but a stroke of fortune kept the aircraft on the runway, within reach of immediate help. Just when it seemed things couldn't escalate further, the aircraft faced another decision point. Only 14 seconds after the initial touchdown, a command for takeoff was considered. In the ensuing chaos, braking ceased, and the thrust setting was hastily changed from full reverse to takeoff mode, a direct violation of standard safety procedures, especially with an ongoing fire in one engine. The captain commanded the left engine to ramp up for an airborne attempt. The aircraft, responding to the increased thrust, quickly lifted off the runway. Simultaneously, the right engine, battered from its encounter with the concrete, attempted an auto start in a desperate bid to function again. As the aircraft ascended to 59 feet, the first officer adjusted the flaps to prepare for what was now a second takeoff. Amidst this, the plane's system issued a sharp warning of being too low with the landing gear not deployed. Reacting swiftly, one of the pilots toggled the gear lever down and then immediately up, although the gear did not engage. This episode underscored the critical influence of system warnings in high-stress moments. Communicating with air traffic control, the first officer declared their intention to go around for another landing attempt. Meanwhile, emergency services on the ground were already mobilizing, having witnessed the sparks from the aircraft's belly scrape along the runway. However, the right engine, despite a momentary recovery, began exhibiting severe vibrations. As the aircraft picked up speed and the pilots retracted the flaps, they remained oblivious to a grave new problem. The engines were now hemorrhaging oil due to substantial damage to their undersides. The engines, resilient until now, were dangerously close to failure. As the plane continued its ascent, passing 500 feet, the pilots adjusted the thrust settings, which caused the engines to respond with alarming vibrations. At approximately 12,200 feet, the aircraft was plagued by low oil pressure warnings from both engines, accompanied by the urgent ringing of master caution alarms, which were quickly silenced by the overwhelmed crew. Complications multiplied as the aircraft climbed higher. The air traffic control instructed a left turn and a new approach for landing, yet failed to mention the prior issues observed with the landing. As the plane turned, the left engine succumbed to its limits and began to fail, leaving the aircraft in a dire state since the right engine's generator had already failed earlier. Electrical power was now hanging by a thread, reliant solely on the auxiliary power unit and the ram air turbine. A bewildering move at 2:36 p.m. and 6 seconds. A decision was made to reduce power to the right engine, which was still partially operational. This decision further jeopardized their situation. Shortly after, the aircraft's recording systems failed, leaving only the emergency backup recorder functional. From this point on, limited information is known. The aircraft maintained its course, reaching an altitude of 3,140 feet. The left engine was out of commission, and the right engine faltered under the strain of poor decision-making. The flight hovered on the edge of disaster, a testament to a series of missteps and mechanical failures that pushed the aircraft and its crew to their limits. The crisis peaks as the crew faces limited options in a dire situation. A pilot's fateful oversight. In the middle of a chaotic cockpit filled with the sound of alarms, the aircraft was quickly losing altitude and speed. At barely 1,000 feet above the ground, flying at 222 knots, the scene inside the cockpit was a frenzy of warnings. Stall alarms, dual control inputs, and urgent beeps that might remind one of an overly enthusiastic video game. Yet, amid this critical scenario, the captain casually asked the first officer for the runway's location, receiving only a silent gesture in response. a point out the windshield. Meanwhile, a concerned air traffic controller from Karachi Tower sensed that something was off and reached out to check if the plane's landing gear was deployed correctly. This moment of doubt soon escalated as the approach controller, also monitoring the aircraft's troubling descent, chimed in to inquire about their situation. The first officer, perhaps attempting to regain some semblance of control, requested to maintain an altitude of 2,000 feet, which was quickly approved. A routine response to an increasingly non-routine situation. Back in the cockpit, as alarms continued to sound, the captain decided to silence them, hoping to mute their predicament's reality. This led to a brief exchange about the status of engine number 2, which was surprisingly still running. Yet the aircraft continued to challenge them. Another altitude alert reminded the crew that they were not managing to maintain their cleared altitude. The cockpit voice recorder captured the second engine picking up speed in a desperate attempt to salvage the flight. As the first officer scrambled to handle the situation, he toggled the generators off and then on, hoping to kickstart them back to life. He also reminded the captain of the minimum speed needed to keep the ram air turbine operational. Amidst this, the captain questioned a critical setting about the engines. Had the first officer mistakenly idled the wrong engine? The response was a simple yes. The situation continued to deteriorate. Sounds resembling engine stalls filled the cockpit, signaling more trouble. The remaining engine, now also failing due to a lack of oil, soon quieted, leaving the aircraft in a grave state. With no engines and only the ram air turbine for power, the plane was merely gliding through the air. Stall warnings blared again, and the first officer's pleas to increase speed were met with a frustrated response from the captain, expressing his helplessness. The aircraft, stripped of its power and struggling against the forces of nature, was a stark example of how quickly conditions can spiral out of control in the skies. The crew, left with minimal options, faced the daunting task of trying to steer a powerless gliding machine back to safety. A grim reminder of the precarious balance between human expertise and the mechanical limits of flight. The entire chain of events unfolded like a tragic script, marked by a clear disregard for safety protocols and a lack of critical decision-making that would ultimately lead to disaster. Initially, there was a brief mention of possibly diverting to a nearby military base, but that option quickly faded from consideration as the Karachi approach controller noticed the aircraft unexpectedly turning left. The first officer assured the controller that they were correcting their path, even though a more pressing issue loomed, engine failure, which was not immediately obvious to those listening to the cockpit's exchanges. As the situation deteriorated, a critical interaction took place. The controller, perhaps uncertain of the plane's status, asked if the crew was preparing for a landing without the landing gear extended, a risky maneuver known as a belly landing. Almost simultaneously, the captain inquired about the status of the gear, to which the first officer responded that it was not deployed. This led to the captain making a snap decision to lower the landing gear. This action, while instinctive and procedural under normal circumstances, was disastrous under the current conditions. Lowering the gear increased the aircraft's drag significantly, drastically reducing its already limited glide capacity. The pilots were now in a dire predicament. With the gear down and the plane losing altitude rapidly, the captain issued instructions for the cabin crew to secure themselves and prepare for an emergency. Meanwhile, distress signals were broadcast, echoing the grave reality of their situation. As they continued to descend, the aircraft's alarm systems began to sound repeatedly, signaling that they were dangerously close to stalling. By the time the plane was at 400 feet, it had nearly lined up with the runway, but it was evident that they wouldn't make it. In a last-ditch effort to save what little glide distance they had left, the captain ordered that no further flaps be deployed to minimize drag. Yet, with the landing gear already down, this effort was too little, too late. The tragic conclusion came at 14:40 and 18 seconds when the aircraft crashed into a densely populated residential area short of runway 25 left. The impact was devastating, with an intense fire breaking out that not only destroyed the aircraft, but also several buildings in its immediate vicinity. Out of the 99 passengers and crew on board, only 2 survived. Additionally, a person on the ground was killed in the incident. What can be done to restore trust in airlines with such troubled histories? Like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into controversial topics.